The coffee was still brewing when I heard the first knock. 3 sharp raps that cut through the morning silence like a blade. I wasn't expecting anyone. Nobody visited anymore. Not since the funeral 6 months ago. The second knock came harder, more insistent. Through the kitchen window I could see a woman in a navy blazer standing on my porch, clipboard in hand. Designer heels tapping against the wooden planks. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I opened the door halfway, keeping the chain latch engaged. "Mrs. Rebecca Hartwell?" she asked, her smile too bright for 8 a.m. "Yes. I'm Jennifer Walsh from Coastal Property Solutions. I understand you might be interested in selling some property." My stomach dropped. I hadn't contacted any real estate agents. I hadn't even thought about selling anything. "I think you have the wrong house," I said, starting to close the door. "Actually," she said, sliding a business card through the gap, "I'm specifically interested in the garage space behind your property. The one registered under Hartwell Holdings, LLC. I stared at the card. Hartwell Holdings, I'd never heard of it in my life. "There must be some mistake," I whispered. "No mistake, Mrs. Hartwell. According to county records, that garage has been generating rental income for the past 8 years. Quite substantial income, actually." She paused, studying my face. "You really don't know, do you?" The chain felt heavy in my hand as I undid the latch. "What rental income?" Jennifer stepped inside, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors. Marcus had installed 3 summers ago, the same floors where we danced to no music on lazy Sunday mornings, where he'd proposed on one knee beside the fireplace, ring box trembling in his hands. "Mrs. Hartwell, your husband's garage has been leased to a private party for $3,200 a month, every month. For 8 years." She pulled out a tablet, swiped across the screen. "That's over $300,000 in rental payments. The lease agreement shows automatic deposits into an account under Hartwell Holdings." I sank into the leather armchair by the window, the same chair where Marcus used to read his engineering journals. Glasses perched on his nose, completely absorbed in blueprints and technical specifications. He was always so methodical, so precise, every tool in its place, every bill paid on time, every aspect of our life carefully organized. "I don't understand," I said. "Marcus never mentioned any rental income. We lived off his salary from the consulting firm. We struggled sometimes, especially when I was between teaching jobs." Jennifer's expression softened. "May I ask when your husband passed?" "February. Heart attack at his desk. He was only 41. "I'm sorry for your loss." She sat down across from me, tablet balanced on her knee. "Mrs. Hartwell, I think there are some things about your husband's business arrangements that you weren't aware of." I thought about the last conversation Marcus and I had. It was the night before he died, over leftover pasta and a bottle of wine that had been sitting in our fridge for months. He seemed distracted, kept checking his phone, apologizing for being distant. When I asked if everything was okay at work, he just nodded and said, "Everything's fine, Becca, just some projects wrapping up." Projects? Always projects with Marcus. "The current tenant," Jennifer continued, "has been trying to contact you for months. The lease expired in March, but they've continued making payments. They want to renew, but they need your signature." "Who is the tenant?" She scrolled through her tablet. "A company called Meridian Research. They've been using the space for equipment storage, according to the lease term." Equipment storage. In our garage, the garage Marcus had always kept locked. The one he said contained old camping gear and broken lawnmower. The garage I'd been avoiding since he died because walking past it reminded me of Saturday mornings, when he'd disappear inside for hours, emerging with grease on his hands, and that satisfied smile he got when he fixed something. "Miss Hartwell, I know this is a lot to process, but Meridian Research is offering to double the monthly rent if you'll sign a new 5-year lease. That's $6,400 a month. It could provide significant financial security." Financial security. The words hung in the air like smoke. I'd been living off Marcus's life insurance policy, rationing the money, selling his belongings piece by piece to cover the mortgage. His tools went first, then his fishing equipment, then his collection of vintage engineering textbooks that I couldn't bear to keep, but couldn't afford to ignore. But $6,400 a month, that was more than I made teaching high school mathematics. That was more than Marcus had ever brought home from his consulting work. I need to see it, I said suddenly. See what? The garage. I need to see what they're renting. Jennifer blinked. You haven't been inside. I shook my head. Marcus always kept it locked. Said it was his space, you know. His workshop. I respected that. The lie came easily. The truth was, I'd been afraid. Afraid of what memories might be waiting in there. Afraid of the silence that would greet me instead of the sound of his tools, his humming, his presence. Well, Jennifer said, standing up. I have the keys if you'd like to take a look. Keys. She had keys to my own garage. We walked through the backyard, past the overgrown flower beds I hadn't tended since the funeral. The garage sat at the far end of our property, separated from the house by a grove of oak trees. Marcus had planted when we first moved in. He said he wanted privacy when he worked on projects. The building was larger than I remembered, maybe because I'd spent so many months avoiding it. 2 stories, with windows on the upper level that I'd never really noticed before. The metal siding had been repainted recently, a soft gray that looked nothing like the rusty blue I remember. Jennifer inserted a key into a lock I didn't recognize. Not the old padlock Marcus used to use, but a digital deadbolt with a small LED screen. When was this installed? I asked. According to the lease agreement, all security upgrades were the tenant's responsibility. The lock beeped twice, and the door swung open. The smell hit me first, not the musty, oil-soaked odor I expected, but something clean and sterile, like a hospital or a laboratory. I stepped inside and froze. It wasn't a garage anymore. The concrete floor had been covered with glossy white tiles. The walls were lined with metal shelving units that stretched from floor to ceiling, each shelf holding identical white containers about the size of shoe boxes. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh clinical brightness. In the center of the space sat a large metal table with what looked like scientific equipment, microscopes, computers, devices I couldn't identify. Everything was spotless, organized with the kind of precision that would have impressed Marcus. What is this? I whispered. Jennifer walked over to one of the shelving units, running her finger along the edge of a container. According to the lease, Meridian Research uses this space for biological sample storage and analysis. Biological samples. Medical research, I assume, though the lease doesn't specify the exact nature of their work. I moved closer to the shelving unit. Each container had a small label with numbers and letters I couldn't decipher. Some had dates going back years when I thought Marcus was in here tinkering with lawnmowers and organizing camping supplies. How long did you say they've been renting this space? 8 years. We'd been married for 10. For 8 of those years. While I was upstairs grading papers and planning lessons. While I was cooking dinner and waiting for Marcus to come home from work. While I was lying in bed listening to him shower off the grease and dirt from his workshop project. There had been strangers in our garage. Strangers conducting research with biological samples 20 feet from where I slept. I walked to the back of the garage, where a narrow staircase led to the second floor. What's up there? I'm not sure. The lease only mentions the ground floor. I climbed the stairs anyway, each step echoing in the sterile space below. The second floor was smaller, but just as precisely organized. File cabinets lined one wall, each drawer labeled with years and codes. A desk sat beneath the windows, facing our house. From here you could see directly into our kitchen and living room. On the desk was a thick folder marked H, monitoring 2019, 2024. H, monitoring. My hands shook as I opened the folder. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Pictures of me leaving for work in the morning. Pictures of me gardening. Pictures of me and Marcus on our back porch, taken from this very window with a telephoto lens. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. At the bottom of the folder was a typed report, several pages long. The header read, Subject Behavioral Analysis. Rebecca Hartwell Final Report. I sank into the desk chair, a folder clutched in my hands. Someone had been watching me, for years, taking notes on my daily routines, my habits, my interactions with Marcus. And somehow, my husband knew about it, or worse, maybe he'd arranged it. Jennifer's voice drifted up from downstairs. Mrs. Hartwell, is everything okay up there? I closed the folder and slipped it under my arm. Fine, I called back, though my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. Just looking around. When I came back downstairs, Jennifer was examining one of the machines on the central table. This is quite sophisticated equipment, she said. Much more advanced than typical medical research setups. You know about medical research? My ex-husband was a lab technician. This looks more like something you'd find at the CDC or a pharmaceutical company. She straightened up, brushing dust off her blazer. Mrs. Hartwell, I think you should seriously consider renewing this lease. Meridian Research clearly values this space highly, and the income could really help with your expenses. I nodded absently, still clutching the folder. What did you say the tenant's name was again? Meridian Research. They're based out of Atlanta according to the paperwork. Do you have a contact number for them? Jennifer scrolled through her tablet. I have Dr. Elizabeth Santos listed as the primary contact. Would you like me to set up a meeting? Dr. Elizabeth Santos. The name meant nothing to me, but I memorized it anyway. Actually, I said, I think I need some time to process all this. Can you give me a few days to think it over? Of course, but I should mention, Dr. Santos did seem quite eager to reach you. She left several messages with our office asking about the lease renewal. We walked back to the house in silence. I watched Jennifer drive away, then went inside and deadbolted the front door. My hands were still shaking as I spread the contents of the folder across my kitchen table. The photographs were dated and organized chronologically. Early ones showed me alone, going about my daily routines, but the later photos included Marcus, and in those images, something was different. He wasn't just my husband going about his day, he was posing. Subtle, but once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. In a photo from last Christmas, Marcus was standing by our mailbox, looking directly at the camera. Not at me, not at some random point in the distance, but straight up at the garage window where the photo was taken. His expression wasn't surprising or confusing. It was an acknowledgement. He knew. The final report was clinical in its detachment. The subject demonstrates consistent behavioral patterns across a 5-year observation period. Daily routine unchanged despite minor life stressors, job changes, financial concerns, marital tensions. Subject appears unaware of surveillance. Recommendation: continue monitoring through established channels. Subject suitable for next phase protocols. Next phase protocols. What did that mean? I flipped to the last page and found a handwritten note in the margin. H cleared for transition pending subject compliance. Cardiac event, scheduled for February 15th, as discussed. February 15th. The day Marcus died, the folder slipped from my hands, photographs scattering across the kitchen floor. Cardiac event, scheduled. Not predicted. Not anticipated. Scheduled. I stared at the words until they blurred together. Someone had planned my husband's heart attack, and somehow, Marcus had known it was coming. The phone rang, making me jump. Unknown number. Hello? My voice barely worked. Mrs. Hartwell, this is Dr. Elizabeth Santos from Meridian Research. I believe you visited our facility today. Our facility. She was calling my garage their facility. I understand you have some questions about the lease arrangement, she continued. I'd very much like to meet with you to discuss renewal terms. Would tomorrow evening work for you? I looked down at the scattered photographs, at the image of Marcus staring directly into the camera lens. Dr. Santos, What exactly has your company been doing in my garage for the past 8 years? There was a pause. Mrs. Hartwell, I think it would be better if we discuss this in person. There are some aspects of our work that your husband was helping us with, and now that he's gone, we need to determine how to proceed. My husband was helping you? In a manner of speaking, yes. He was quite instrumental in our research. I thought about the $300,000 in rental payments, about the surveillance photos, about the note mentioning his scheduled cardiac event. Dr. Santos, I think I need to understand what really happened to my husband. Another pause. Longer this time. Mrs. Hartwell, I think we need to have a very frank conversation. Your husband's death was complicated. There are things you deserve to know, but they're not the kind of things we can discuss over the phone. The line went quiet except for the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Tomorrow evening, she said finally. 7 o'clock. And Mrs. Hartwell, please don't contact anyone else about this until we've had a chance to talk. For your own safety. The line went dead. I sat in my kitchen as darkness fell around me, surrounded by photographs of my own life taken by strangers, holding a report that treated me like a laboratory specimen. Somewhere in Atlanta, Dr. Elizabeth Santos was preparing to tell me things about my husband that I apparently wasn't ready to hear. And for the first time since Marcus died, I wasn't sure I wanted to know the truth. I didn't sleep. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marcus standing by our mailbox, looking directly into that camera, looking at them, acknowledging them. By 6 a.m. I was sitting at my laptop searching for any trace of Meridian Research online. Their website was sleek but vague. Advanced biomedical research for tomorrow's healthcare solutions. Generic stock photos of scientists in white coats, smiling people in lab settings that could have been anywhere. No specifics about what they actually did. The company was registered in Delaware. Like thousands of shell corporations, Dr. Elizabeth Santos was listed as Chief Research Officer, but her biography was limited to a PhD in molecular biology from Emory University and 15 years of experience in pharmaceutical development. No publications, no previous employers, no conference presentations. For a research scientist, she was remarkably invisible. I made coffee and called my sister Amy in Portland. Becca, it's barely dawn there. Are you okay? Amy, I need you to help me with something, and I need you to not ask too many questions. There was a pause. Amy had been my lifeline since Marcus died, calling every few days, sending care packages, offering to visit whenever I needed her. But she also knew when I was in crisis mode. What do you need? Can you run a background check on someone? Through your firm? Amy worked as a paralegal for a law office that handled corporate investigations. Depends on who and why. A Dr. Elizabeth Santos. She's connected to some business dealings. Marcus was involved in that I'm just finding out about. Marcus had business dealings you didn't know about. I stared at the surveillance photos still scattered across my kitchen table. More than I realized. Okay, I can run a preliminary search. Give me her full name and any other details you have. After I hung up, I walked back to the garage. In daylight, it looked even more surreal. The pristine white tiles, the endless rows of labeled containers, the scientific equipment that probably cost more than my car. I climbed the stairs to the second floor and sat at the desk where someone had spent years watching my life through telephoto lenses. The file cabinets were locked, but the desk drawers weren't. Inside the top drawer, I found a set of keys and a leather-bound notebook. The notebook contained handwritten entries, dates and observations written in precise block letters. Day 1, 2047. Subject maintains consistent 6:45 a.m. departure for work. No deviation in route. H reports subject remains unaware of monitoring protocols. Day 130:56. Subject exhibited mild anxiety following H's return from Atlanta trip. Behavior normalized within 48 hours. H administered standard reassurance protocols. Day 1892. Subject asked about garage access. H successfully deflected with tool storage explanation. recommend enhanced security measures. And Marcus. They'd reduced my husband to an initial. I flipped to the most recent entries. Day 2, 108, reporting increased stress levels. Cardiac symptoms manifesting as planned. Subject shows no suspicion of timeline acceleration. Day 2, 11 on 115. Final phase initiated. Keach briefed on extraction protocols. Subject conditioning complete. Day 2, 117. Cardiac event successful. Subject response within expected parameters. Transition to phase 2 approved. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the notebook. Cardiac event successful. They'd killed my husband, and someone had been taking notes like it was a lab experiment. I used the keys to open the file cabinets. The first drawer contained medical records, dozens of them, dating back 8 years, all with my name, my date of birth, my social security number. Blood work I'd never authorized, psychological evaluations based on observational data, brain scans I'd never taken. But according to these files, I'd been a patient at something called the Meridian Institute for the past 3 years. Regular appointments, treatments, medications I'd never heard of. The records showed a diagnosis of chronic dissociative disorder with memory suppression tendencies. Memory suppression. They were claiming I had a condition that caused me to forget things. The second drawer held financial records. Not just the rental payments to Hartwell Holdings, but transfers from Meridian Research to Marcus's personal account. Hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years, labeled as consultation fees and compliance incentive. Marcus had been paid to let them watch me, paid to help them study me, like a lab rat. The third drawer contained what looked like research protocols. Technical documents with titles like long-term behavioral conditioning in isolated subjects and pharmaceutical intervention for memory management. The papers were dense with medical terminology, but certain phrases jumped out. Subject conditioning through controlled environment manipulation. Partner compliance essential for extended observation periods. Memory modification techniques to ensure subject cooperation. Memory modification. They hadn't just been watching me. They'd been changing me. I thought about the gaps in my memory over the past few years. Times when Marcus said we'd had conversations. I couldn't remember. Medications he'd given me for headaches that seemed to come out of nowhere. Days when I'd felt foggy and disoriented, which he'd attributed to stress from work. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mrs. Hartwell, this is Dr. Santos. I know you've been in the facility. We need to meet immediately. There are things about your condition that require urgent attention. My condition. As if I were still their patient. I texted back, what condition? I've never been your patient. The response came within seconds. Please check your medical records from the past 3 years. Dr. Reeves at Meridian Institute has been monitoring your care. Your memory issues are more serious than you realize. Dr. Reeves. I'd never heard that name in my life. But as I stared at the medical files spread across the desk, doubt crept in. What if I really did have memory problems? What if there were entire pieces of my life I'd forgotten? The files looked official, with letterheads and signatures and detailed notes that would be impossible to fake. Another text. Mrs. Hartwell, without proper medication, your condition will deteriorate rapidly. We've been working with your husband to manage your care, but now we need to speak with you directly. I set the phone down and looked around the room again. Everything was so clinical, so professional. The equipment, the files, the careful documentation. It would take serious resources to fabricate all of this, just to deceive one woman, unless that woman was worth deceiving. I opened the last file cabinet drawer and found a folder labeled Phase 2 Implementation. Inside was a document that made my blood freeze. Subject Reintegration Protocol. Following successful partner extraction, the subject will be transitioned to a controlled facility environment. Cover story. Voluntary admission following grief-related psychological breakdown. Estimated timeline, 6-8 months post-extraction. Partner extraction. Marcus's death. They'd killed my husband as part of a plan to have me committed to some kind of facility. And they'd been setting it up for months, creating medical records that would support the story that I was mentally unstable. My phone rang. Dr. Santos again. Mrs. Hartwell, I understand this is overwhelming, but I need you to listen carefully. You've been off your medication for 6 months now, and we're seeing signs of severe psychological deterioration. The paranoid ideation, the false memories, the conspiracy thinking, these are all symptoms of your condition. What medication? Risperidone and lamotrigine. Your husband had been administering them in your food to avoid triggering your resistance to treatment. It's a common approach with patients who lack insight into their condition. I felt dizzy. Marcus had been drugging me. Dr. Santos, I found files that suggest you've been conducting unauthorized research on me. Mrs. Hartwell, those files are part of your treatment records. You've been a voluntary patient at our residential facility for the past 3 years. Your husband brought you to us after you began experiencing severe dissociative episodes. That's not true. I've never been to any facility. Rebecca, this is exactly what we were afraid of. The memory gaps are getting worse. You need to come in immediately so we can restart your treatment protocol. I hung up and immediately called Amy back. Amy, I need you to check something else. Can you look up any medical records under my name? Anything from the past few years? Becca, what's going on? You sound terrified. I think someone's been drugging me and creating fake medical records to make it look like I'm mentally ill. There was a long pause. Becca, honey, do you remember when you called me last year? You were confused about where you were, said Marcus had taken you somewhere for treatment, but you couldn't remember agreeing to go. My stomach dropped. What? You called me from some kind of medical facility. You were crying, said you couldn't remember how you got there or why Marcus had brought you. But then Marcus got on the phone and explained that you'd had a breakdown and were getting help. I had no memory of this conversation. Amy, what facility? I don't remember the name. Somewhere in Georgia, I think. Marcus said it was temporary, just until you stabilized. When I called back a few days later, you sounded much better. You said you remembered everything, and that you'd been confused, but were feeling much clearer. And you believed that? Becca, you sounded completely normal. Like yourself again. And Marcus said the doctors had adjusted your medication, and you were responding well. I closed my eyes. Amy, I have no memory of any of this. That's exactly what you said when you first called me from that place. After I hung up, I sat in the sterile room above my garage, surrounded by evidence of a life I didn't remember living. Files that showed I'd been a patient. Medical records documenting treatments I couldn't recall. Phone calls to my sister that I'd apparently made but had no memory of. Either I was losing my mind, or someone had been systematically erasing pieces of my memory for years. I picked up the notebook again and flipped to an entry from 18 months ago. Day 16034. Memory modification protocol successful. Subject has no recollection of previous week's facility stay. H reports subject questioning timeline gaps but accepts work stress explanation. Recommend bi-monthly treatments to maintain compliance. Bi-monthly treatments. Every 2 months, they'd been taking me somewhere, doing something to my memory, and sending me home with no recollection of what had happened. And Marcus had been helping them do it. I found my purse and keys. I needed to get out of that room, away from the files and photos and evidence of my stolen life. But as I started down the stairs, I heard voices outside. Through the garage windows, I could see 2 black SUVs parked in my driveway. 4 people in dark suits stood near my front door, and a 5th was walking around the side of my house toward the garage. I grabbed the notebook and the file folder marked Phase 2 implementation, and looked for another way out. The garage had a rear door that opened onto the wooded area behind our property. I'd never used it, but Marcus must have known it was there. The door was unlocked. I slipped outside just as I heard the front garage door opening behind me. Mrs. Hartwell? A man's voice called out. We're here to help. Dr. Santos sent us to bring you in for treatment. I ran through the trees, branches catching at my clothes. The stolen files clutched against my chest. Behind me, I could hear them searching the garage, calling my name with voices that were calm and professional, and terrifying in their certainty that they had the right to take me. My car was blocked by their vehicles, but Mrs. Patterson next door was in her garden. I'd barely spoken to her since Marcus died, but now I stumbled across her yard, breathing hard. "Rebecca? Dear, are you all right?" "Mrs. Patterson, I need to use your phone. It's an emergency." She looked at my torn clothes and wild expression, then glanced toward my house where the black SUVs were clearly visible. "Come inside," she said quietly. From her kitchen window, we watched the suited figures searching my property. Mrs. Patterson handed me her landline without asking questions. I called the one person I trusted completely. "Amy, they're here, at my house. I need you to call the police and tell them that people are trying to abduct me." "Becca, who's there?" "The people from Meridian Research. They're saying I'm mentally ill, and they need to take me for treatment. But Amy, I think they've been experimenting on me. I think they killed Marcus to get access to me. I'm calling 911 right now." "No, wait. What if they really do have medical records that make me look crazy? What if the police believe them instead of me?" Through the window, I saw one of the suits talking on a radio. Another was taking photos of Mrs. Patterson's house. "Amy, I'm going to text you an address. Can you drive down here tonight? And bring someone with you. A lawyer, if possible." "Becca, this sounds incredibly dangerous." "It is, but I think running is more dangerous than staying. I found files that show they're planning to have me committed, and if they succeed, I'll disappear just like Marcus did." I gave Mrs. Patterson Amy's contact information and asked her to call if anyone came to her door asking about me. Then I slipped out her back door and made my way through the neighborhood to the public library 3 blocks away. In the library's computer lab, I uploaded photos of the stolen files to a cloud storage account and emailed copies to Amy. If something happened to me, at least there would be evidence. Then, I started researching Meridian Institute, the facility where I'd apparently been a patient but couldn't remember. What I found made everything worse. The Meridian Institute was a legitimate psychiatric facility in Atlanta, with an excellent reputation for treating complex psychological disorders. Their website featured testimonials from grateful families and accreditations from major medical organizations. But buried in medical journal archives, I found something else. Dr. Elizabeth Santos had published papers on experimental memory modification techniques, studies involving pharmaceutical intervention for treatment-resistant patients with dissociative disorders. The papers described a process where patients could be treated without their conscious awareness, with medications that temporarily suppressed memory formation while therapeutic interventions were performed. They'd been using me as a test subject. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Rebecca, we know where you are. We're not your enemies. Your sister is driving down from Portland because she's worried about you. We've spoken with her, explained your condition. She agrees that you need immediate treatment. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." They'd contacted Amy, which meant they probably knew everything I'd just done. I gathered my things and left the library, but I had nowhere to go. They were watching my house, they'd contacted my sister, and they had medical records that could convince anyone that I was delusional. But I had one advantage. The files I'd stolen contained their real plans. Documentation of their experiments, their methods, their timeline for having me committed. I just needed to survive long enough to prove it. I found refuge in the most unlikely place, a 24-hour diner called Mel's, on the outskirts of town. The kind of establishment where truckers and insomniacs gathered over bottomless coffee, where nobody asked questions, and the fluorescent lights buzzed loud enough to drown out whispered conversations. I chose a corner booth with a clear view of the parking lot and ordered coffee I didn't want. The stolen files sat in a manila envelope beside me, and every few minutes I checked to make sure they were still there. Physical proof was all I had left. At 11 p.m., my phone rang. "Amy, Becca, where are you? I'm at Mrs. Patterson's house, and she said some people in suits were looking for you." "Amy, listen carefully. Don't tell anyone where I am. Did you call the police? I tried, but then I got a call from someone claiming to be your doctor, Dr. Santos. She said you'd stopped taking medication for a serious mental health condition and were having a psychotic episode. My heart sank. And you believed her. Becca, she knew things. She knew about the call I got from you last year when you were confused. She knew about your headaches, about the times you've seemed disoriented. She said Marcus had been managing your care privately because you were resistant to treatment. I closed my eyes. Of course they'd prepared for this. They'd been documenting my symptoms for years, building a case that would convince anyone who mattered. Amy, I'm going to send you some files, photos of documents I found. Look at them before you decide whether I'm crazy. Okay, but Becca, I also need to tell you something else. Dr. Santos said, if you don't come in voluntarily tonight, they'll have to involve law enforcement. They have a court order for involuntary psychiatric hold. A court order. They'd moved fast. Based on what evidence? Medical records showing a pattern of deteriorating mental health, missed appointments, medication, non-compliance. And apparently Marcus had filed some kind of petition before he died, expressing concern about your safety. Even from the grave, Marcus was still helping them control me. I hung up and immediately uploaded the photos I'd taken of the research files to Amy's email. Then I called her back. Check your email. Look at the file labeled Phase 2 Implementation. Tell me if that sounds like legitimate medical treatment. While Amy reviewed the documents, I studied the other patrons in the diner. A trucker, reading a paperback novel. An elderly woman working a crossword puzzle. A young couple sharing a piece of pie. Normal people, living normal lives. Unaware that someone could be systematically erasing their memories and no one would believe them when they tried to explain. Becca. Amy's voice was different when she called back. Shaken. What is partner extraction? Their code name for killing Marcus. Jesus. And Phase 2? Having me committed so they can continue their experiments in a controlled environment. There was a long pause. Becca, if this is real, if these documents are authentic, then you're in serious danger. But if they're not, if your mind is creating these conspiracies, then I'm dangerous to myself and everyone around me, I finished. Amy, I know how this sounds. I know what they've set up. But think about it logically. If I were having a psychotic break, would I be able to function well enough to find these files, understand them, and develop a coherent plan? People with certain types of mental illness can be very high functioning. She was right, and we both knew it. The perfect trap. The more rationally I argued my case, the more it could be interpreted as elaborate delusion. Amy, there's one way to test this. The files mention specific dates when they took me to their facility. Cross-reference those dates with your phone records. Check if I called you from Georgia on any of those days. 20 minutes later, she called back. Becca, I found 3 calls from Georgia numbers over the past 2 years. All on dates that match entries in those files. And I found something else. What? I recorded one of those calls. I was so worried about you that I started recording our conversations when you seemed confused. Do you want me to play it back? I wasn't sure I did, but I needed to hear it. Amy's voice came through the phone, tinny and distant. Becca, you called me but the connection was bad. Then my own voice, but wrong somehow, flat and uncertain. Amy? I don't know where I am. Marcus brought me somewhere, but I can't remember agreeing to come here. There are doctors, but I don't understand what they're treating me for. You're getting help for anxiety and memory problems. Remember? Marcus explained it to me. I don't remember having memory problems before this week. In the background of the recording, I could hear Marcus's voice. Rebecca, give me the phone. You're confusing yourself. Then Marcus, speaking to Amy. She's been having episodes. The doctors here specialize in dissociative disorders. She'll be much better in a few days once they adjust her medication. The recording ended. Amy, I have absolutely no memory of making that call. But it's definitely your voice. Yes, but listen to how I sound. Drugged. Confused. That's not how someone sounds when they're getting better. That's how someone sounds when they're being chemically restrained. I heard Amy take a shaky breath. Becca, what do you need me to do? Before I could answer, a black sedan pulled into the diner's parking lot. Two people in dark clothing got out and stood by their car, scanning the building. I have to go. They found me. I left money on the table and walked toward the back of the diner, where an exit sign glowed above a door marked Employees Only. The kitchen staff was too busy to notice me slip through. The back alley was dark and narrow, lined with dumpsters and loading docks. I could hear voices from the front of the building, calm and professional. They weren't rushing because they didn't need to. Where could I go that they couldn't follow? I thought about the research files, about the meticulous documentation of my daily routines. They knew everywhere I normally went, everyone I normally contacted, but they didn't know about the places Marcus had never seen me go. 20 years ago, before I met Marcus, I'd had a different life. Friends he'd never met, places he'd never been. Some of those connections might still exist. I walked through back alleys until I reached a convenience store with a payphone. Using the phone book, I found a number I hadn't dialed in 15 years. Jenny, this is Rebecca Martinez. I know it's been forever, but I need help. Jenny Reeves had been my college roommate, my maid of honor, my closest friend, until life and geography pulled us in different directions. She'd moved to Charleston for work around the time I got married, but we'd lost touch after a few awkward dinners where it became clear that Marcus didn't approve of my party girlfriends. Becca? Oh my God, I heard about Marcus. I'm so sorry. I wanted to call, but I wasn't sure. Jenny, I need somewhere to stay tonight. Somewhere no one would think to look for me. And I need you to not ask questions until tomorrow. Are you in trouble? I think so, but I also think I might be losing my mind, and I need someone I trust to help me figure out which. An hour later, I was sitting in Jenny's apartment, above a vintage bookstore in the historic district, watching her read through the research files while she occasionally muttered things like, "What the hell? And this can't be legal. Becca, these documents are either evidence of serious crimes or the most elaborate delusion I've ever seen. Either way, you need professional help." What kind of professional help? If this is real, you need a lawyer and a private investigator. If it's not real, you need a psychiatrist who isn't connected to these people. Jenny had always been practical. It's why we'd been such good friends despite being complete opposites. How do I tell the difference? We verify everything independently. Tomorrow we drive to Atlanta and find this Meridian Institute. We see if it's real, if Dr. Santos is real, if any of this checks out. We also contacted a lawyer who specializes in medical malpractice. And if they're watching for me to do exactly that, Jenny smiled grimly. Then we don't go as Rebecca Hartwell. The next morning, Jenny handed me a driver's license with my photo but a different name, Sarah Chen. My cousin's ID. You're close enough in height and coloring that it'll work for casual inspection. We drove to Atlanta in Jenny's car, which wouldn't be connected to me in any database. The Meridian Institute was exactly where their website said it would be, a modern complex in a medical district, surrounded by other legitimate healthcare facilities. Looks real enough, Jenny said as we sat in the parking lot. Too real. If they were running illegal experiments, would they do it somewhere this visible? We walked into the lobby, where a receptionist greeted us with the kind of professional warmth you'd expect from a high-end medical facility. "We're here to visit a patient," Jenny said. "Rebecca Hartwell. I'm her sister." The receptionist checked her computer. "I don't show anyone by that name currently admitted. She was here several times over the past few years. Outpatient, treatment for memory issues. More typing. I'm not finding any records under that name." "Are you sure she was treated here?" Jenny and I exchanged glances. Either they were lying, or the treatments had been conducted somewhere else using the Meridian Institute's name. "Is Dr. Elizabeth Santos available?" I asked. "Dr. Santos? I don't have anyone by that name on our staff directory." The trap was more sophisticated than I'd realized. They'd created a parallel version of a real facility, complete with fake staff and fake treatment records, but none of it existed in the legitimate institution's actual system. Back in the car, Jenny was quiet for a long time. Becca, that receptionist had no reason to lie to us. If you were really treated there, there would be records. Unless the records are kept separately from their main database. Or unless the treatments never happened at a real medical facility. We drove back toward Charleston in silence, both of us processing what we'd learned. The Meridian Institute was real, but Dr. Santos wasn't part of it, which meant either the medical records were completely fabricated or the treatments had been conducted somewhere else entirely. My phone rang. Unknown number. Rebecca, you're making this much more difficult than it needs to be. Dr. Santos' voice was patient but strained. Your friend Jenny is now involved in something that could put her in danger. I looked at Jenny, whose face had gone pale. How do you know about Jenny? We know about everyone you might contact. We've been monitoring your communications for years. Did you really think we hadn't prepared for the possibility that you might resist treatment? If you're legitimate medical professionals, why are you threatening people? Rebecca, you assaulted your sister yesterday. You broke into a private medical facility. You stole confidential patient records. These are not the actions of someone who's thinking clearly. I had no memory of assaulting Rachel. But then again, I had no memory of a lot of things. Put me on speaker. Dr. Santos continued. I want your friend to hear this. I reluctantly activated the speaker function. Ms. Reeves, your friend is very sick. She suffers from a rare form of dissociative identity disorder that causes her to create elaborate false memories and conspiracy theories. Her husband was working with us to get her treatment, but his death has accelerated her symptoms. Jenny looked at me uncertainly. The documents she showed you are forgeries, Dr. Santos continued. Part of her delusional system, she's created an entire false narrative to explain why she can't remember periods of her life when she was receiving treatment. That's not true, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. Rebecca, can you remember what you did last Tuesday? I tried to think back. Tuesday felt like it had happened months ago, not days ago. You can't, can you? Because you were having an episode. Jenny, she called you that day, didn't she? Asked you about things that never happened. Jenny's expression shifted. Becca, you did call me Tuesday. You were confused about where you were, and said someone had been in your house. I had no memory of that conversation either. The memory gaps are getting worse, Dr. Santos said gently. Without treatment, she could become a danger to herself or others. We're trying to help her, but she needs to come in voluntarily. After the call ended, Jenny pulled over to the side of the road. Becca, I want to believe you, but what if you really are sick? What if those files are something your mind created? I stared at the manila envelope in my lap. The documents looked real, felt real, contained information that would be impossible for me to fabricate. But mental illness could be incredibly sophisticated. Jenny, there's one way to know for sure. The files mention specific bank transfers, money that was paid to Marcus from Meridian Research. If I'm delusional, those transactions won't exist. We stopped at a bank and requested records for Marcus's accounts. As his widow, I had legal access to his financial history. The transfers were there. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, exactly matching the amounts listed in the research files. Jenny stared at the bank statements. Becca, either you're psychic or someone really was paying your husband to experiment on you. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. Physical evidence that couldn't be explained away by mental illness. But as we walked back to the car, I noticed a white van that had been behind us earlier. Same license plate. Same tinted windows. Jenny, we're being followed. She glanced in the rearview mirror. Are you sure? I'm not sure about anything anymore, but that van has been behind us since we left Atlanta. Jenny drove a circuitous route back to her apartment, taking random turns and doubling back through neighborhoods. The van stayed with us. Okay, she said finally. I believe you. Whatever's happening, it's real. As we parked behind the bookstore, Jenny turned to me. Becca, if these people killed your husband and have been experimenting on you for years, what's their end game? What do they ultimately want? I thought about the Phase 2 documents, about the plan to have me permanently committed to a controlled facility. I think they want to perfect their memory modification techniques, and I'm their test subject. But why you? Why not use volunteers or people who actually need treatment? That was the question I'd been avoiding, because the answer was too terrible to contemplate. Because I'm not the only one. The research files mention other subjects, other partners who provided access. I think they're running a large-scale experiment on unwilling subjects, using their spouses and families to maintain control. Jenny was quiet for a long moment. If that's true, then there are other people out there like you. Other people who've had their memories stolen. And other people whose partners might have died under suspicious circumstances. As we climbed the stairs to Jenny's apartment, I realized that solving my own case might be impossible, but finding the other victims, that might be the key to bringing down the entire operation. The question was, how many people had they destroyed to perfect their techniques on me? Jenny's laptop screen glowed in the dark apartment as we spent the night cross-referencing the coded entries from the research notebook. Each subject was identified by a single letter, followed by a number. Marcus had been H7, which suggested at least 6 other people in his category. Look at this, Jenny said, pointing to an entry from 2 years ago. Subject, K3 partner extraction, completed via vehicle accident. Subject conditioning at 78% effectiveness. Vehicle accident. Like what happened to Isabel, Logan's mother from the original story I'd tried to forget. But this wasn't the same case. This was someone else entirely. And here, I said, finding another entry. Subject M12 partner extraction delayed due to subject resistance. Recommend enhanced pharmaceutical intervention. We found 17 different subject codes scattered throughout the notebook. 17 people who had been unknowingly experimented on, their partners either complicit like Marcus or eliminated when they became inconvenient. Becca, this is massive. We're not just talking about medical malpractice. This is systematic human trafficking for research purposes. I rubbed my eyes, exhausted but unable to stop reading. The question is how to find these other people. The codes don't give us names or locations. Jenny pulled up a search engine. Maybe we don't need names. Look at the dates of the partner extractions. If these were all made to look like accidents or natural deaths, there should be news reports. We started with the most recent entries. K3's partner extraction had been dated March 15, 2023. Searching for fatal car accidents in the Southeast on that date, we found dozens of reports, but one stood out. A single vehicle crash in Savannah, where a 38-year-old man named David Kim had died when his car veered off a bridge. David Kim, DK, that could be the partner for Subject K, Jenny said. The obituary described him as a devoted husband to Catherine Kim, a software engineer who worked from home, no children. Survived by his wife and his parents in California. If Catherine Kim is Subject K3, she's probably going through the same thing I am. Might not even realize her husband was killed. Jenny was already searching for Catherine Kim's contact information. Found her. She's still living in Savannah, same address as in the obituary. We can't just call her, if they're monitoring her communications like they were monitoring mine. Then we drive to Savannah and knock on her door. 3 hours later, we were parked outside a modest ranch house in a quiet neighborhood. Catherine Kim's yard was overgrown, newspapers piled up on the porch. Either she was away, or she was hiding inside like I had been. Jenny walked up to the front door while I stayed in the car. Hat pulled low and sunglasses on, despite the early morning hour. If Meridian Research was watching Catherine, they'd be looking for me specifically. Catherine answered the door cautiously, keeping the chain latch engaged. She was Asian American, probably early 30s, with dark circles under her eyes, and the pale complexion of someone who hadn't been outside in weeks. Mrs. Kim, I'm Jenny Reeves. I'm a paralegal investigating some irregularities in medical research. I'd like to ask you about your husband's death. David didn't participate in any medical research. No, but you might have, without knowing it. The door started to close. But Jenny pressed on. Mrs. Kim, Have you experienced memory gaps since your husband died? Periods where you can't account for your time? Medications that appeared in your house that you don't remember getting? The door stopped moving. How could you possibly know that? Because it happened to someone else. Someone who's been trying to figure out what was done to her. Can we come in? There are things you need to see. 20 minutes later, Catherine was staring at the research files spread across her coffee table, her hands shaking as she read entries about subject K3. This is about me, she whispered. These dates match exactly. Times when I lost hours or days and David said I'd been sick, that I'd been confused. Do you remember being treated at any medical facilities? I asked. David said he took me to a specialist in Atlanta a few times when I was having what he called episodes, but I can only remember fragments. Waiting rooms, paperwork, feeling groggy afterward. Catherine, did David ever give you medication for anxiety or sleep problems? She nodded slowly. Pills, he said. The doctor prescribed. I took them because I trusted him, but they made me feel disconnected from myself. The parallels were exact. Different people, different circumstances, but the same methods of control and manipulation. Catherine, there's something else. According to these files, David's death wasn't an accident. She looked up sharply. What do you mean? The researchers documented it as a partner extraction. They killed him because he was no longer useful to their operation. Catherine stood abruptly, pacing to the window. That's impossible. David loved me. He wouldn't have been involved in anything that hurt me. Maybe he didn't know what he was really part of. Maybe they told him you were genuinely sick and needed treatment. Or maybe he was being coerced, Jenny added. Threatened or paid to cooperate. Catherine turned back to us. If this is true, if David was murdered, then I want these people destroyed. What do we do? That's when my phone rang. Dr. Santos again. Rebecca, I know you're in Savannah. I know you've contacted Catherine Kim. You're putting her in danger by involving her in your delusions. I put the call on the speaker. Catherine is not part of my delusions, Dr. Santos. She's another one of your victims. Mrs. Kim is a grieving widow who's been receiving bereavement counseling through our outreach program. She doesn't need to be exposed to your conspiracy theories. Catherine's face went white. Bereavement counseling? I never signed up for any counseling. Mrs. Kim, you've been attending weekly sessions with Dr. Martinez for the past 3 months. I understand that grief can affect memory, but surely you remember our discussions about managing your anxiety. I don't know anyone named Dr. Martinez. There was a pause on the line. Mrs. Kim, this is exactly why we've been concerned about your mental state. The memory gaps, the confusion about recent events. We've been trying to help you process your husband's death, but you seem to be blocking out our sessions. Catherine looked at Jenny and me in panic. Am I going crazy? How can I not remember 3 months of therapy sessions? Because they weren't therapy sessions, I said. They were a continuation of the experiments. They've been continuing to modify your memory even after David died. Dr. Santos' voice became sharper. Mrs. Kim, I need you to step away from these women. They're not trying to help you. Rebecca Hartwell is experiencing a severe psychotic break, and she's projecting her delusions onto your situation. Then explain the bank records, Catherine said suddenly. Explain the payments to David from Meridian Research that I found when I was settling his estate. Another pause. Longer this time. Mrs. Kim, your husband was a consultant for our research division. He helped us develop better treatment protocols for patients with memory disorders. The payments were completely legitimate. Consultant for what, exactly? David was an accountant. He provided insight into the daily life challenges faced by people with your condition. Catherine walked to a desk in the corner and pulled out a folder. These are David's financial records, $4,000 a month for 2 years, labeled as research consultation fees. But there's no contract, no documentation of what the consultation involved. Mrs. Kim, I really think you should come in so we can discuss this properly. These memory issues are clearly more severe than we realized. No, Catherine's voice was steady now. I'm not going anywhere with you. and I want to know what you did to my husband." The line went dead. Catherine sank into her chair, still holding David's financial records. "They've been drugging me for 3 months, taking me somewhere, doing things to my memory, and sending me home with no recollection, just like they did when David was alive. The question is why," Jenny said. "If they already perfected their techniques on you during the marriage, why continue after David died?" I thought about the Phase 2 documentation. Because they're not just testing memory modification, they're testing long-term control. How to manage subjects indefinitely without partners to help maintain the illusion. "You mean they're planning to keep doing this to us for the rest of our lives?" Before I could answer, Catherine's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, knocked on the door. "Catherine, dear, there are some people outside asking about you. They say they're from your doctor's office." Through the front window, we could see 2 black sedans parked across the street. 4 people in dark clothing stood beside them, trying to look casual but clearly watching the house. "Back door," Catherine said. "My yard connects to the greenbelt. We can get to my car without them seeing us." As we gathered the files, I noticed something I'd missed earlier. In the margin of one page, someone had handwritten a list of locations, backup facilities. Augusta, Macon, Columbus, Valdosta. "Catherine, they have multiple locations. If we're going to stop this, we need to find the other subjects before Meridian Research relocates them." We slipped out through Catherine's backyard and made our way to her car parked 2 streets over. As we drove out of the neighborhood, I saw the black sedans pulling into Catherine's driveway. "Where are we going?" Catherine asked. "Augusta," I said. "If they have backup facilities, there might be other subjects being held there." Jenny was already on her phone. "I'm calling my law firm. We need legal help and we need it fast." But as we drove north toward Augusta, I realized that legal help might not be enough. These people had killed husbands, erased memories, and created elaborate medical cover stories that could fool any court. They had resources, connections, and years of experience in making their victims look insane. We needed more than lawyers. We needed proof that would be impossible to discredit. "Catherine, the bereavement counseling sessions you can't remember. Where were they supposed to have taken place?" She pulled out her phone and checked her calendar. "According to my appointments, Dr. Martinez's office, 1247 Peachtree Street." Jenny looked it up. "That's a legitimate medical building. Lots of therapists and psychiatrists. Which means they're using real locations to make their fake treatments seem credible." When we reached Augusta, we drove to the address listed in the backup facilities note. It was an industrial complex on the outskirts of town, surrounded by chain-link fencing. The sign read, "Augusta Medical Storage, Climate-Controlled Pharmaceutical Warehousing." "Doesn't look like a place where they'd bring people for treatment," Catherine observed, but as we watched from across the street, a white van with tinted windows pulled up to the security gate. The driver showed an ID card and the gate opened automatically. "Jenny, can you see the license plate?" She grabbed binoculars from her glove compartment. "It's a Georgia plate, but I can't make out all the numbers." The van disappeared into the complex, but 20 minutes later it emerged again. This time, we followed it. The van drove to a residential neighborhood and stopped outside a small house with overgrown landscaping. An elderly man emerged from the house, moving slowly and looking confused. The van driver, a woman in scrubs, helped him into the vehicle. "They're collecting people," I said. "Bringing them to the facility." We followed the van back to the industrial complex and watched as the elderly man was escorted inside through a side entrance marked "Authorized Personnel Only." "We need to see what's inside that building," Catherine said. "We need to call the police," Jenny countered. "And tell them what? That we think there's a medical conspiracy based on files we stole from a garage? Files that the people involved will claim are forgeries created by a mentally ill woman." Jenny was quiet for a moment. "So, what do you suggest?" I looked at the industrial complex, thinking about all the people who might be inside. People like me, like Catherine, who had no idea what was being done to them. We need to document everything, get video evidence of what they're doing inside that building. Something that can't be explained away or dismissed. That sounds incredibly dangerous. More dangerous than letting them continue to experiment on people. Catherine was already studying the fence line. There's a delivery entrance on the side. If we wait until dark, we might be able to get close enough to see inside. As the sun set over Augusta, we prepared to infiltrate the facility where our stolen memories might finally be recovered, or where we might become permanent subjects in an experiment that had already destroyed too many lives. But we also knew that whatever we found inside would either vindicate everything we'd discovered, or prove that we really were as delusional as Dr. Santos claimed. Either way, we were about to find out just how deep this conspiracy really went. The security cameras swept the perimeter every 90 seconds. Jenny timed them while Catherine and I crouched behind a dumpster, watching the patterns of the night shift guards. The industrial complex was more heavily secured than any medical facility had a right to be. 2 guards, Catherine whispered. One at the main gate, one patrolling the building. The patrol takes 6 minutes to complete a full circuit, which gives us a 5-minute window to get to that service entrance, I calculated. Jenny checked her phone. Are we really doing this? Breaking into a building based on a theory about memory experiments? It's not a theory anymore, I said, showing her the video I'd recorded on my phone. That elderly man they brought in, I saw him being wheeled out unconscious 20 minutes ago. Whatever they're doing in there, they're doing it fast. We'd been watching the facility for 3 hours. In that time, we'd seen 6 people brought in and 5 brought out. All of them elderly, all appearing confused or disoriented when they arrived, all unconscious when they left. Okay, Jenny said finally, but we document everything and get out fast. No heroics. The security camera swept past us. And we made our move. The chain link fence had a gap near the service entrance, where the metal had been bent back, probably by previous delivery trucks. We squeezed through and pressed ourselves against the building's concrete wall. The service entrance was a steel door with a keypad lock, but beside it was a small window set high in the wall. Catherine, the shortest of us, stood on Jenny's shoulders and peered inside. It's a medical facility, she whispered down to us. Hospital beds, IV equipment, monitoring devices, but no patients are visible from this angle. Any way to get inside? Catherine tried the window. It's unlocked. Probably for ventilation. Jenny boosted Catherine up, and she slipped through the window. A minute later, the service door opened, from the inside. The coast is clear, Catherine said. But there are cameras in the hallways. We entered what looked like a legitimate medical treatment center. Clean white walls, professional equipment, everything properly labeled and organized. But the atmosphere felt wrong. Too quiet, too sterile, like a movie set designed to look like a hospital. This way, I said, following signs toward patient recovery. If they were bringing people here for memory modification, there would be evidence in the recovery area. The recovery ward contained 12 beds, each equipped with IV poles and monitoring equipment. 6 beds were occupied by people in their 60s and 70s, all unconscious, all with IV lines running into their arms. Jenny checked the chart at the foot of the nearest bed. Robert Morrison, age 67, admitted today for memory integration therapy. Whatever that means, I photographed the chart, then moved to the next bed. Margaret Fletcher, 72, same procedure. Catherine was examining the IV bags. These aren't standard saline solutions. The labels say Meridian Compound 7 and Memory Stabilizer. They're drugging them, Jenny said, but for what purpose? Before I could answer, we heard footsteps in the hallway. I grabbed Jenny and Catherine, pulling them behind a supply cart as a nurse in scrubs entered the ward. The nurse moved efficiently between the beds, checking monitors and adjusting IV drips. She made notes on each chart, then stopped at Robert Morrison's bed and injected something additional into his IV line. Time for memory consolidation, she murmured to herself, then checked her watch. The subject should be ready for discharge in 30 minutes. Memory consolidation. They weren't just erasing memories, they were implanting new ones. The nurse left, and we emerged from behind the cart. We need to see what's in those computers, I said, pointing to workstations, set up between the beds. Jenny accessed the nearest terminal while Catherine and I kept watch. Jesus, she whispered. These aren't medical records, they're programming schedules. On the screen was a detailed timeline for Robert Morrison. Memory erasure, 8-hour, 8:30 p.m. False memory implantation, 8:30 9:15 p.m. Integration therapy, 9:15 10-hour. Post-treatment monitoring, 10-hour. False memory implantation. Catherine read over Jenny's shoulder. They're not just taking memories away, they're putting fake ones in. I scrolled through other patient files. Margaret Fletcher was scheduled to forget her daughter's recent visit and instead remember a phone call where her daughter said she was moving to California. Another patient was having memories of a deceased spouse replaced with memories of the spouse leaving voluntarily. They're rewriting people's personal histories, I said, making them forget relationships, changing how they remember important events. But why? Jenny asked. That's when I found a folder labeled Inheritance Intervention Program. Inside were legal documents showing how the memory modifications were being used to influence elderly patients' financial decisions. Margaret Fletcher had signed over power of attorney to a lawyer she didn't remember meeting. Robert Morrison had changed his will to leave his estate to a charity that didn't exist. It's not just about research, I said. They're stealing from these people, using memory modification to manipulate them into signing over their assets. Catherine pulled up another file. Look at this. Partnership program. They're recruiting family members to bring in their elderly relatives. Payment structure based on estate value. The pieces clicked together. Meridian Research wasn't just conducting experiments, they were running a sophisticated elder abuse operation. They recruited partners through financial incentives or coercion, used those partners to gain access to elderly family members, then modified the victims' memories to facilitate financial exploitation. Marcus wasn't just helping them experiment on me, I realized. He was probably supposed to help them get access to my parents when they got older, or to use me to recruit other people. Jenny downloaded the files to a flash drive, while I photographed everything we couldn't copy. We had enough evidence to expose the entire operation. If we could get out alive. That's when the alarm started. Red lights flashed throughout the ward, and an automated voice announced, "Security breach detected." Facility lockdown initiated. The doors slammed shut with an electronic click. We were trapped. "Emergency exit," Catherine said, pointing to a door marked with an exit sign. But when she tried it, nothing happened. Electronic locks. We're not getting out that way. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway, outside. Multiple people, moving fast. "The window we came through," Jenny said. "If we can get back to the service area." "Too late," I said, watching through the door's small window as guards took positions in the hallway. Dr. Santos's voice came through the facility's intercom system. "Rebecca, Catherine, I know you're in there. You've seen enough to understand the scope of our work. Come out and we can discuss this rationally." I keyed the intercom response button. "Dr. Santos, we have evidence of what you're doing. Elder abuse, financial fraud, illegal medical procedures. It's over. Rebecca, you're still not seeing the bigger picture. Do you think we're doing this for money? For some petty financial scheme? Then what are you doing it for? We're solving the problem of human suffering. Memory is the source of all emotional pain, trauma, grief, regret, loss. All of it exists only because people remember things that hurt them. We've developed the ability to edit human consciousness, to remove suffering and replace it with peace. Through the window, I could see Dr. Santos approaching with 2 guards. She was a woman in her 50s, professional appearance, the kind of person you'd trust completely in a medical setting. "The elderly patients you saw tonight will go home with no memory of loss, no regret about past mistakes, no fear about their declining health. They'll live their remaining years in contentment. By stealing their money and erasing their relationships, by freeing them from the burdens of a lifetime of accumulated pain, the financial arrangements simply fund our research and provide care for patients whose families can no longer support them. The door opened, and Dr. Santos entered with her guards. Rebecca, you've been fighting our treatment for months, but look at the pain it's caused you. The paranoia, the conspiracy thinking, the inability to accept your husband's death. We can take all of that away. You can remember Marcus as a loving husband who died peacefully with no knowledge of affairs or betrayals. I don't want to forget, I said. The pain is part of who I am. Pain serves no purpose once the threat that caused it is gone. We're offering you the chance to be happy. Catherine stepped forward. What about choice? What about consent? These people didn't agree to have their memories changed. Catherine, your husband brought you to us because you were destroying yourself with grief over your miscarriages. You spent 3 years unable to function, unable to work, unable to find joy in anything. We gave you relief. Catherine's face went white. What miscarriages? The 3 pregnancies you lost before David died. The reason you couldn't have children. The source of the depression that was ruining your marriage. I never had any miscarriages. David and I never tried to have children. Dr. Santos looked genuinely surprised. Catherine, we have medical records, hospital reports, and grief counseling notes. You were treated for pregnancy loss at Emory University Hospital. Those records are fake, Catherine said, but her voice was uncertain. Are they? Or have you been so resistant to treatment that you've blocked out the memories we were trying to help you process? I watched Catherine's face as doubt crept in. That was their weapon. They didn't just erase memories, they made their victims question their own sanity. Catherine, I said firmly, remember the bank records. Remember the payments to David. Remember the research files we found. Focus on what we can prove. Jenny held up the flash drive with the downloaded files. We have documentation of everything. Financial fraud, illegal medical procedures, elder abuse. Even if you discredit us, you can't discredit corporate records and financial transactions. Dr. Santos smiled. Jenny, you've been very helpful in this investigation. More helpful than you realize. Jenny frowned. What do you mean? We've been monitoring this entire situation since Rebecca first entered the garage. We knew she would eventually find someone to help her, and we needed to see how far she would take her investigation. You're saying Jenny is working with you? Not knowingly, but Jenny's law firm has been representing Meridian Research in various legal matters for years. When she started asking questions about us, her partners contacted us immediately. Jenny's face went pale. That's impossible. I would know if my firm represented you. Would you? How carefully do you read client lists? How much attention do you pay to shell corporations and subsidiary companies? Dr. Santos pulled out a tablet and showed us a contract. Jenny's law firm, Coastal Legal Services, listed as counsel for various Meridian subsidiaries. Jenny, every search you've done, every background check you've run, every legal inquiry you've made, it's all been monitored and reported to us. We knew exactly where you were going and what you were looking for. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. We'd thought we were investigating them, but they'd been controlling our investigation from the beginning. The elderly patients in this facility, Dr. Santos continued, they're here because their families brought them to us, voluntarily, legally, with proper medical documentation and power of attorney. Obtained through coercion and fraud, I protested. Obtained through families who wanted their loved ones to be free from suffering. Rebecca, your own sister, called us yesterday. My heart stopped. Rachel? She's concerned about your mental state. She's prepared to sign commitment papers to have you admitted for treatment. She believes, as we do, that you need help. Rachel is part of this? Rachel is a loving sister who wants her family member to receive proper care for a serious mental illness. The walls were closing in. Everyone I'd trusted, everyone who was supposed to help me, had been connected to Meridian Research in some way. Marcus, Rachel, possibly even Jenny's law firm, they'd built a complete network around me. But there was one thing they hadn't accounted for. Dr. Santos, I said, if I'm mentally ill, if all of this is in my head, Then explain the other subjects we found. Explain Catherine's husband's death. Explain the financial records, the research files, the 17 other subjects documented in your notebooks. Rebecca, you created an elaborate fantasy involving other people to make your delusions seem more credible. It's a common symptom of your condition. Then why is Catherine here? Why is she corroborating everything I've said? Dr. Santos looked at Catherine with what appeared to be genuine sympathy. Catherine, you've been manipulated by someone with a very sophisticated mental illness. Rebecca convinced you that your husband was murdered, that you were being experimented on, that your memories had been altered, but your husband died in a car accident, and your grief therapy has been completely voluntary. Catherine looked back and forth between us, uncertainty written across her face. Catherine, I said desperately, remember the research files. Remember the coded entries about your husband's death. Rebecca, those files were forgeries you created to support your delusions, Dr. Santos said gently. Very convincing forgeries, which shows how intelligent you are, but forgeries nonetheless. I realized then that we'd walked into a trap that had been designed specifically for this moment. Every piece of evidence we'd gathered could be explained away as elaborate delusion. Every ally we'd found could be discredited or revealed as an unwitting accomplice. But there was still one card left to play. Dr. Santos, if everything I've said is false, if I'm delusional and dangerous, then why haven't you called the police? Why are we having this conversation in a secret medical facility instead of a hospital emergency room? For the first time, Dr. Santos hesitated. Because you know that if law enforcement gets involved, if real investigators start looking into Meridian research, they'll find evidence you can't explain away. Evidence that exists outside of my supposedly delusional mind. Dr. Santos' expression hardened. Rebecca, you're going to accept treatment voluntarily, or you're going to be committed involuntarily. Either way, this ends tonight. That's when the real police sirens started wailing outside the facility. Jenny smiled grimly. Did you really think I'd come here without backup? My paralegal supervisor has had instructions to call 911 if I didn't check in by midnight. Dr. Santos's calm facade cracked completely. You have no idea what you've done. I've saved lives, Jenny said. Starting with my own. As law enforcement surrounded the building, and the real investigation began, I realized that our nightmare was finally ending. But I also knew that the memories they'd stolen from me, from Catherine, from all their victims, those might be lost forever. The question now was whether justice would be enough, or whether we'd spend the rest of our lives trying to piece together the parts of ourselves they'd taken away. The FBI raid on Meridian Research's Augusta facility lasted 14 hours. Agent Sarah Martinez, a specialist in healthcare fraud, led the investigation with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen too many cases of medical exploitation. Mrs. Hartwell, she said as we sat in the FBI's mobile command center at dawn, what you've uncovered here is one of the largest elder abuse operations we've ever seen. But I need you to understand that building a prosecutable case is going to be complicated. I was exhausted, running on coffee and adrenaline, but I needed to hear this. Complicated how? Memory modification creates unique legal challenges. If the victims can't remember what was done to them, how do we prove they didn't consent? If their memories have been altered, how do we establish what really happened versus what they were made to believe happened? Catherine sat beside me, equally drained. What about the financial records? The stolen assets? Those are solid. We can prosecute the fraud charges based on documentation alone. But the medical assault charges, the murder charges for the partners who were eliminated, those require victim testimony that may no longer exist. Agent Martinez pulled out a thick folder. We've identified 43 victims across 5 states. Elderly individuals who signed over assets to shell companies, changed their wills to benefit strangers, or gave power of attorney to lawyers they claim not to remember meeting. 43 people, I whispered. How many partners were killed? 17 confirmed deaths that match the research patterns. Heart attacks, car accidents, falls, poisonings, all made to look accidental or natural. all occurring when the partners either became uncooperative or were no longer needed for access. 17 murders. Marcus was just one of 17 people killed to facilitate this operation. Dr. Santos and 6 staff members are in custody, Agent Martinez continued. But Santos is claiming that everything was done with proper consent, that the memory modifications were legitimate medical treatments for trauma and depression. What about Dr. Reeves? The one who was supposedly treating me. Dr. Reeves doesn't exist. It was an alias used by Dr. Santos when she needed to create medical records for patients who were never actually seen. Jenny joined us from the evidence processing area. They seized over 10,000 files from the facility. Financial records, research data, correspondence with partners. It's going to take months to process everything. What about the memory compounds they were using? Catherine asked. Can they be reversed? Agent Martinez exchanged glances with Jenny. That's where we have both good news and bad news. The good news is that the compounds they used primarily affect short-term memory consolidation. Many long-term memories may still be recoverable. And the bad news? Recovery would require controlled re-exposure to memory triggers, potentially including traumatic material. Some victims might be better off not remembering what was done to them. I thought about that. Did I want to remember everything Marcus had done? Every time I'd been drugged and taken to a facility? Every moment of violation and betrayal? Agent Martinez, what happens to the victims who are still alive? That depends on their families. Some will choose to leave their relatives in their current state, with the false memories intact. Others will try to restore what was taken. And the elderly people we found in the facility last night, they're being evaluated by independent medical teams. Most have family members who genuinely believed they were getting legitimate treatment. The family members who were recruited as partners, many of them thought they were helping their loved ones cope with depression or trauma. Jenny pulled up something on her tablet. Rebecca, there's something else you need to see. The background check Amy ran on Dr. Santos finally came through. She showed me a federal database entry. Dr. Elizabeth Santos had been involved in CIA memory research programs in the 1990s, programs that were shut down due to ethical violations and human rights concerns. She's been doing this for decades. I said. Meridian Research wasn't her first operation. Agent Martinez nodded grimly. We're coordinating with international authorities. Similar operations have been identified in Canada, Mexico, and 3 European countries. Santos was part of a network that franchised memory modification technology to criminal organizations. The scope was staggering. Thousands of victims across multiple countries, all exploited through the same methods of memory manipulation and partner coercion. Agent Martinez, what about my sister Rachel? You said she contacted Meridian Research about having me committed. Rachel Morrison is being questioned. She claims she genuinely believed you were having a mental breakdown and needed help. She received a call from someone claiming to be your doctor, expressing concern about your psychological state. Do you believe her? The financial records suggest she was paid for her cooperation, but the payments were disguised as loans from Marcus. It's possible she didn't realize what she was really being paid for. I felt hollow thinking about it. Rachel had betrayed me, but she might have been manipulated just like everyone else. The web of deception was so complex that even the participants might not have understood their true roles. What happens now? Catherine asked. Now, we rebuild, Agent Martinez said. You'll both need extensive psychological evaluation to determine what memories can be recovered and what interventions are possible. You'll also be the primary witnesses in multiple federal prosecutions. And if the prosecutions fail, if Santos and her team get acquitted because the evidence is too complicated for juries to understand, then at least we shut down the operation. Even if the criminal cases fail, we've saved the people who would have been victimized next. Over the following weeks, the investigation expanded into a multi-agency task force. The media coverage was intense, but confusing. How do you explain memory modification to the public? How do you make people understand that their loved ones' personalities could be artificially altered? I spent hours with FBI psychologists trying to piece together my real memories from the false ones. Some recovered memories were horrifying, times when I'd been semi-conscious in medical facilities, aware that something was being done to me but unable to resist. Other recovered memories were surprisingly mundane. Marcus giving me pills disguised as vitamins, making phone calls in code while he thought I was sleeping. Catherine's recovery was more dramatic. When the memory blocks were lifted, she remembered 3 miscarriages that had actually happened, years of depression that David had hidden from her family, and her genuine consent to some early treatments that had later been expanded without her knowledge. "I don't know what to feel," she told me during one of our joint therapy sessions. "I'm angry that they lied to me, but I'm also grateful that they took away some of the pain." That was the ethical complexity that made prosecution so difficult. Some victims had genuinely benefited from having traumatic memories removed. Some had lived happier lives without the knowledge of betrayals and losses. The question was whether anyone had the right to make those decisions for someone else. 3 months after the raid, I stood in my garage, the real garage, not the laboratory that had been built inside it. The equipment was gone, the walls had been repainted, and it looked like an ordinary storage space again. But I couldn't escape the feeling that the room was still watching me. Jenny helped me sort through boxes of Marcus's belongings that the FBI had returned after processing them for evidence. "Look at this," she said, holding up a leather journal. "It's Marcus's handwriting, but it's addressed to you." The journal contained entries dating back 5 years, documenting Marcus's growing involvement with Meridian Research. Day 1. They approached me at a conference, said they were developing treatments for depression and PTSD. The money they offered would solve our financial problems. Day 47, Rebecca had one of her headaches today. I gave her the pills they provided. She seemed calmer afterward, less anxious about work. Day 56, they want to increase the frequency of treatments. I'm not comfortable with this, but they reminded me about our agreement. Day 312. Rebecca asked about the garage today. I had to lie to her again. I hate what I've become. Day 57. They say she's responding well to the memory stabilization therapy. She seems happier, but she's not really herself anymore. Day 80-23. I went out, but they showed me photos of what happened to other partners who tried to leave. I have to protect Rebecca, even if it means continuing to hurt her. Day 94. They told me I'm getting sick. Heart problems. They can treat it, but only if I continue cooperating. I don't think I have a choice anymore. Day 1, 2047. Final entry. If Rebecca finds this, I want her to know that I loved her. The real her, not the version they created. I tried to save both of us, but I failed. I hope someday she can forgive me. I closed the journal, tears blurring my vision. Marcus had been a victim too, trapped in a system that exploited his love for me to ensure his compliance. "Rebecca," Jenny said gently, "what are you going to do now?" I looked around the garage, thinking about the life I'd built with Marcus and the life I was going to have to build without him. "I'm going to testify. At every trial in every jurisdiction where they prosecute these cases, I'm going to make sure that what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else. And after that, I'm going to try to figure out who I really am. Not the version Marcus loved, not the version Meridian Research created, but the person I choose to be." 6 months later, I testified in federal court against Dr. Santos and her associates. The trial lasted 8 weeks and covered crimes spanning 15 years. The jury heard testimony from victims, family members, former employees, and law enforcement officials. Dr. Santos was convicted on 47 counts of elder abuse, medical fraud, conspiracy, and second-degree murder. She received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. 16 other defendants received sentences ranging from 10 to 30 years. The civil lawsuits were more complicated. How do you calculate damages for stolen memories? How do you compensate someone for having their personality artificially altered? Some victims chose not to participate, preferring to live with their modified memories rather than relive their traumas. Catherine decided to have her memories fully restored. She wanted to grieve her miscarriages properly, to remember her marriage as it really was, to reclaim ownership of her own mind even if it meant accepting pain. I chose a middle path. I recovered enough memories to understand what had been done to me, but I didn't pursue complete restoration. Some of the false memories Marcus and I had shared were beautiful, even if they weren't real. I decided to keep those and build new, authentic memories around them. Rachel and I had a long, difficult conversation about her role in everything. She had genuinely believed she was helping me get treatment for a mental illness. The payments she received from Marcus had been explained as loans to help her through financial difficulties. She had been manipulated, but she had also chosen to believe the manipulation rather than trust her own sister. We're slowly rebuilding our relationship. But it's different now. Trust, once broken by memory modification and systematic deception, doesn't heal easily. A year after the trial, I moved away from Charleston. The house held too many false memories, too many questions about what had been real and what had been artificially implanted. I bought a small cottage in the mountains of North Carolina, where I could see the horizon clearly and no one could watch me through telephoto lenses. I kept the garage key, though, not the digital lock that Meridian Research had installed, but the original key that Marcus had kept on his keychain. It doesn't open anything anymore, but it reminds me that secrets always have a cost, and that the people we trust most are sometimes the ones who can hurt us the deepest. On quiet evenings, I sit on my porch and try to separate my real memories from the false ones. It's not always possible, but I've learned that the authenticity of a memory matters less than what you choose to do with it. The woman who loved Marcus, who trusted him completely, who believed in their perfect marriage, she was real, even if some of her experiences weren't. The woman who survived his betrayal, who uncovered a massive conspiracy, who fought to reclaim her own mind, she's real too. I'm both of those women, and I'm neither of them. I'm the person I'm choosing to become, one authentic memory at a time. And every day, I remember that I'm free. The garage is empty now, but I finally know what was really inside it all along. The truth about the price of love, the cost of trust, and the strength required to rebuild a life from stolen pieces. Some doors are meant to stay locked. Others need to be opened, no matter how much it hurts to see what's inside. I'm glad I finally found the courage to turn the key. The FBI raid on Meridian Research's Augusta facility lasted 14 hours. Agent Sarah Martinez, a specialist in healthcare fraud, led the investigation with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen too many cases of medical exploitation. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said as we sat in the FBI's mobile command center at dawn, "what you've uncovered here is one of the largest elder abuse operations we've ever seen. But I need you to understand that building a prosecutable case is going to be complicated." I was exhausted, running on coffee and adrenaline, but I needed to hear this. Complicated how? Memory modification creates unique legal challenges. If the victims can't remember what was done to them, how do we prove they didn't consent? If their memories have been altered, how do we establish what really happened versus what they were made to believe happened? Catherine sat beside me, equally drained. "What about the financial records? The stolen assets? Those are solid. We can prosecute the fraud charges based on documentation alone. But the medical assault charges, the murder charges for the partners who were eliminated, those require victim testimony that may no longer exist." Agent Martinez pulled out a thick folder. "We've identified 43 victims across 5 states, elderly individuals who signed over assets to shell companies, changed their wills to benefit strangers, or gave power of attorney to lawyers they claim not to remember meeting." 43 people, I whispered. "How many partners were killed?" 17 confirmed deaths that match the research patterns. Heart attacks, car accidents, falls, poisonings, all made to look accidental or natural. All occurring when the partners either became uncooperative or were no longer needed for access. 17 murders. Marcus was just one of 17 people killed to facilitate this operation. Dr. Santos and 6 staff members are in custody," Agent Martinez continued. But Santos is claiming that everything was done with proper consent, that the memory modifications were legitimate medical treatments for trauma and depression. What about Dr. Reeves, the one who was supposedly treating me? Dr. Reeves doesn't exist. It was an alias used by Dr. Santos when she needed to create medical records for patients who were never actually seen. Jenny joined us from the evidence processing area. They seized over 10,000 files from the facility, financial records, research data, correspondence with partners. It's going to take months to process everything. What about the memory compounds they were using? Catherine asked. Can they be reversed? Agent Martinez exchanged glances with Jenny. That's where we have both good news and bad news. The good news is that the compounds they used primarily affect short-term memory consolidation. Many long-term memories may still be recoverable. And the bad news? Recovery would require controlled re-exposure to memory triggers, potentially, including traumatic material. Some victims might be better off not remembering what was done to them. I thought about that. Did I want to remember everything Marcus had done? Every time I'd been drugged and taken to a facility. Every moment of violation and betrayal. Agent Martinez. What happens to the victims who are still alive? That depends on their families. Some will choose to leave their relatives in their current state, with the false memories intact. Others will try to restore what was taken. And the elderly people we found in the facility last night, they're being evaluated by independent medical teams. Most have family members who genuinely believed they were getting legitimate treatment. The family members who were recruited as partners, many of them thought they were helping their loved ones cope with depression or trauma. Jenny pulled up something on her tablet. Rebecca, there's something else you need to see. The background check Amy ran on Dr. Santos finally came through. She showed me a federal database entry. Dr. Elizabeth Santos had been involved in CIA memory research programs in the 1990s, programs that were shut down due to ethical violations and human rights concerns. She's been doing this for decades, I said. Meridian Research wasn't her first operation. Agent Martinez nodded grimly. We're coordinating with international authorities. Similar operations have been identified in Canada, Mexico, and 3 European countries. Santos was part of a network that franchised memory modification technology to criminal organizations. The scope was staggering. Thousands of victims across multiple countries, all exploited through the same methods of memory manipulation and partner coercion. 3 days later, I received a call that changed everything. Agent Martinez's voice was urgent when she spoke. Rebecca, we need you to come in immediately. We've discovered something in Dr. Santos' personal files that directly concerns you and your family. When I arrived at the FBI field office, Agent Martinez led me to a secure conference room where a woman I didn't recognize was waiting. She appeared to be in her 70s, well-dressed but with the kind of tremor in her hands that suggested recent trauma. Rebecca, Agent Martinez said, I'd like you to meet Eleanor Hartwell. She's Marcus's mother. I stared at the woman in shock. That's impossible. Marcus's parents died in a car accident when he was 25. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. That's what they told him. What they made him believe. Rebecca, I've been looking for my son for 15 years. Agent Martinez opened a file. Eleanor came forward after seeing news coverage of the Meridian Research arrests. She recognized Marcus's photo from the media reports. I don't understand, I said, sinking into a chair. Marcus showed me his parents' death certificates. We visited their graves. Eleanor leaned forward. Marcus disappeared from his apartment in Boston in 2009. I filed missing person reports, hired private investigators, and spent my life savings trying to find him. The police said he'd probably left voluntarily, that adult children sometimes cut contact with their families. Agent Martinez placed several documents on the table. Mrs. Hartwell, the death certificates Marcus showed you were forgeries. The graves he took you belonged to different people entirely. Meridian Research created an entire false background for your husband. But why? Why would they do that? Eleanor spoke quietly. Because Marcus wasn't just helping them study you, Rebecca. He was their first long-term subject. They've been controlling his memories for over a decade. The room spun around me. Marcus was a victim too? More than that, Agent Martinez said. We believe Marcus was their prototype. They perfected their memory modification techniques on him before expanding to other subjects. His entire relationship with you may have been part of their experiment. Eleanor pulled out a photo album. This is my son as I remember him. Before they took him, the photos showed a younger Marcus, but his face was different somehow. Softer, more open, with genuine warmth in his eyes. The Marcus I'd known had always seemed slightly guarded, as if part of him was held in reserve. They changed his personality, Eleanor continued. Marcus was always gentle, but he was also creative, spontaneous. He painted, wrote poetry, played guitar. The man you married sounds like a careful, controlled version of who he really was. I thought about Marcus's methodical habits. His predictable routines, his almost obsessive organization, had all of that been artificially imposed? Agent Martinez, how much of Marcus's life was real? We're still investigating, but it appears that Meridian Research recruited him through a fake job opportunity. They brought him to one of their facilities, began memory modification procedures, and gradually replaced his original personality with a constructed one designed to serve their purposes. What purposes? Creating the perfect research partner. Someone who would be completely loyal to their objectives, who would never question their methods, who would help them gain access to potential subjects. Eleanor reached across the table and took my hand. Rebecca, Marcus would never have willingly participated in hurting you. Whatever they made him do, it wasn't really him. I felt something crack inside my chest. All the anger I'd carried toward Marcus, all the betrayal and hurt, it was based on actions taken by someone who wasn't really himself. There's more. Agent Martinez said gently, we found evidence that Meridian Research has been planning this operation for decades. They identified potential long-term subjects in colleges and universities, then systematically isolated them from their families and support systems. They chose me in college? Possibly earlier. Your high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Patricia Donovan, received payments from a Meridian subsidiary for over 10 years. We think they've been tracking potential subjects since adolescence. The revelation was overwhelming. My entire adult life had been orchestrated by people I'd never known existed. Jenny entered the conference room carrying another file. Rebecca, we found something else. Financial records showing that your parents received payments from Meridian Research right up until they died. My parents were involved. Not willingly, we think. The payments were disguised as insurance benefits for your father's workplace accident. But the amounts were far higher than any legitimate settlement would have been. Agent Martinez opened the new file. We believe Meridian Research arranged your father's accident to make your family financially dependent on them. They needed leverage to ensure your parents wouldn't interfere with their long-term plans for you. I stared at the payment records, seeing my family's financial struggles in a new light. Every time my parents had mysteriously been able to pay bills they couldn't afford, every unexpected windfall that had kept us afloat, it had all been part of ensuring I remained isolated and controllable. They killed my father. We're investigating that possibility. The accident that disabled him showed signs of mechanical sabotage, but the evidence was never properly preserved. Eleanor squeezed my hand tighter. Rebecca, they destroyed both our families to create their perfect experiment. But we're both here now. We both survived. Over the following weeks, more revelations emerged from the FBI investigation. Meridian Research had operated like a cult, recruiting vulnerable people through fake opportunities, and gradually replacing their authentic selves with constructed personalities designed to serve the organization's goals. Marcus hadn't been the only long-term subject. They'd identified 12 other individuals who had been similarly isolated from their families and psychologically reconstructed over periods of years or decades. The technology they'd used was more sophisticated than anyone had initially realized, not just memory suppression and implantation, but personality restructuring through targeted trauma and conditioning. They essentially created sleeper agents. Agent Martinez explained during one of our briefings. People who believed they were living normal lives, but were actually programmed to carry out specific functions within the organization's structure. Catherine and I were offered experimental treatments to reverse some of the psychological conditioning we'd undergone. The process was risky. There was no guarantee that recovering our original personalities wouldn't cause severe psychological trauma. I decided to proceed with partial treatment. I wanted to understand who I really was, beneath the layers of manipulation and false memories. The treatments took place at Walter Reed Medical Center under the supervision of military psychologists who specialized in deprogramming. The process involved controlled exposure to suppressed memories while under careful medical supervision. What I discovered was both liberating and terrifying. My authentic personality was stronger than the constructed one Meridian Research had tried to impose. I was naturally more assertive, more questioning, less willing to accept situations I couldn't understand. The compliant, trusting wife I'd been was a carefully crafted fiction. But I also discovered memories of genuine love for Marcus, not the controlled version I'd lived with, but glimpses of his authentic self, breaking through the programming. Moments when his original personality had surfaced, when he'd seemed confused by his own actions, when he'd looked at me with an expression I couldn't interpret. Eleanor underwent similar treatments to help her process the trauma of losing her son and finding him again, only to learn he'd been psychologically destroyed. Together, we pieced together fragments of Marcus's original personality. He'd been an artist, someone who saw beauty in unexpected places. He'd wanted to travel, to write, to create things that mattered. The engineering career, the consulting work, the methodical lifestyle, all of it had been imposed to make him useful to Meridian Research. I think he was fighting them, Eleanor said during one of our sessions. Toward the end, based on what you've told me about his behavior, I think part of his original self was trying to break through. That explained his growing agitation in his final months, his distraction, his apparent guilt about things he couldn't name. Some buried part of Marcus had been trying to warn me, trying to resist what he was being compelled to do. The trials began 6 months after the initial arrests. Dr. Santos and her associates faced charges in multiple jurisdictions, with victims testifying about crimes they could only partially remember. I testified for 3 days, describing not just what had been done to me but what I'd learned about Marcus's manipulation and the broader scope of the organization's operations. During my testimony, Dr. Santos sat motionless at the defense table, showing no emotion as I described the systematic destruction of my husband's identity and the theft of my own memories. When her lawyer cross-examined me, he focused on the gaps in my recollection, the uncertainty about which memories were authentic and which were fabricated. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, "if your memories have been altered, how can this court trust anything you're telling us?" "Because the physical evidence corroborates everything I've said," I replied. "The financial records, the research files, the testimony of other victims, all of it supports the same conclusion. But your emotional responses, your interpretations of events, your understanding of your husband's motivations, all of that could be colored by false memories, couldn't it?" "Yes, but the core facts remain unchanged. People were hurt, lives were destroyed, families were torn apart for profit and research." Eleanor testified about Marcus's disappearance and the 15 years she'd spent searching for him. Her testimony was devastating. A mother's love turned into a weapon against the people who had stolen her son. Catherine testified about David's death and her own manipulation, her voice steady as she described waking up from memory modification procedures in strange locations with no recollection of how she'd gotten there. The prosecution presented evidence of the international scope of the operation, the systematic targeting of vulnerable individuals, the murders disguised as accidents, and the financial exploitation of elderly victims. Dr. Santos' defense was sophisticated but ultimately unconvincing. Her lawyers argued that all procedures had been conducted with proper consent, that the memory modifications were legitimate medical treatments, that the deaths of partners were coincidental. But the jury saw through the technical arguments to the human cost. After deliberating for 4 days, They returned guilty verdicts on all major charges. Dr. Santos received life in prison without the possibility of parole. Her associates received sentences ranging from 25 to 40 years. The civil lawsuits were more complex, but ultimately successful. A federal judge approved a settlement fund of $2.8 billion to compensate victims and their families. But money couldn't restore stolen memories or resurrect the dead. It couldn't give Eleanor back the 15 years she'd lost with her son, or return Marcus to his authentic self. 2 years after the trials ended, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I moved to Boston and enrolled in art school. During the memory recovery treatments, I'd discovered that my original personality included a passion for visual art that had been suppressed for decades. I'd loved drawing and painting as a child, but somewhere along the way, probably through Meridian Research's early interventions, I'd lost touch with that part of myself. Eleanor moved to Boston too. We bought a duplex near the harbor, sharing space, but maintaining our independence. She helped me navigate the process of reclaiming my authentic self while I helped her process the grief of losing Marcus. We visited Marcus's grave regularly, but we also created a memorial garden for the person he'd been before his identity was stolen. Eleanor planted the flowers he'd loved as a child. I painted portraits based on her photographs of his original self. Catherine chose a different path. She decided not to pursue memory recovery, preferring to build a new life on the foundation of who she'd become, rather than trying to resurrect who she'd been. She moved to Oregon and started a nonprofit organization that helped victims of psychological manipulation. Jenny returned to legal practice but specialized in cases involving medical exploitation and elder abuse. She helped establish new federal guidelines for investigating memory-related crimes. Amy and I rebuilt our relationship slowly. She felt guilty about not recognizing that I was in danger, but I helped her understand that the manipulation had been so sophisticated that even trained professionals had been deceived. Rachel and I had a harder reconciliation. Learning that she'd been manipulated didn't erase the fact that she'd chosen to believe the worst about me, rather than investigating further. We exchange Christmas cards now, but we're not truly close. 5 years after Marcus's death, I held my first art exhibition. The paintings depicted memories, some real, some false, some impossible to categorize. The exhibition was titled Stolen Light, and it explored the question of whether the authenticity of an experience mattered less than its emotional impact. Eleanor attended the opening, proud and tearful as she saw her son's artistic spirit reflected in work that had emerged from the wreckage of everything Meridian Research had tried to destroy. Marcus would have loved this, she said, standing before a painting I'd made of him based on her descriptions of his authentic personality. Not the Marcus they created, but the real one. The one who saw beauty in broken things. That night, alone in my studio, I looked back over the journey that had brought me here. The woman who'd avoided her husband's garage for months, afraid of what memories it might contain, no longer existed. She'd been replaced by someone stronger, someone who understood that the truth was worth whatever pain it might bring. I kept one memento from my old life, the key to Marcus's garage, not the electronic lock that Meridian Research had installed, but the original brass key he'd carried for years. Sometimes I hold it and try to imagine what might have happened if I'd used it sooner. If I'd been brave enough to confront the secrets Marcus was keeping. If I'd trusted my instincts about the gaps in my memory and the strange inconsistencies in our life together. But I've learned that dwelling on alternate histories is just another form of false memory. The only truth that matters is what I choose to do with the knowledge I have now. Every morning, I wake up in a life I've built with my own hands, based on memories I know are authentic, because I created them myself. Every choice I make is mine, not programmed by someone else's agenda. The garage key sits on my nightstand, a reminder that some doors lead to darkness, but others lead to freedom. The difference isn't in the door itself, but in the courage required to walk through it. I finally know who I am. Rebecca Hartwell, survivor, artist, seeker of truth. Not the woman someone else designed me to be, but the woman I chose to become. And for the first time in my life, that's enough. Agent Martinez. What about my sister Rachel? You said she contacted Meridian Research about having me committed. Rachel Morrison is being questioned. She claims she genuinely believed you were having a mental breakdown and needed help. She received a call from someone claiming to be your doctor, expressing concern about your psychological state. Do you believe her? The financial records suggest she was paid for her cooperation, but the payments were disguised as loans from Marcus. It's possible she didn't realize what she was really being paid for. I felt hollow, thinking about it. Rachel had betrayed me, but she might have been manipulated just like everyone else. The web of deception was so complex that even the participants might not have understood their true roles. What happens now? Catherine asked. Now we rebuild, Agent Martinez said. You'll both need extensive psychological evaluation to determine what memories can be recovered and what interventions are possible. You'll also be the primary witnesses in multiple federal prosecutions. And if the prosecutions fail, if Santos and her team get acquitted because the evidence is too complicated for juries to understand, then at least we shut down the operation. Even if the criminal cases fail, we've saved the people who would have been victimized next. Over the following weeks, the investigation expanded into a multi-agency task force. The media coverage was intense but confusing. How do you explain memory modification to the public? How do you make people understand that their loved ones' personalities could be artificially altered? I spent hours with FBI psychologists, trying to piece together my real memories from the false ones. Some recovered memories were horrifying. Times when I'd been semi-conscious in medical facilities, aware that something was being done to me but unable to resist. Other recovered memories were surprisingly mundane. Marcus giving me pills disguised as vitamins, making phone calls in code while he thought I was sleeping. Catherine's recovery was more dramatic. When the memory blocks were lifted, she remembered 3 miscarriages that had actually happened, years of depression that David had hidden from her family, and her genuine consent to some early treatments that had later been expanded without her knowledge. I don't know what to feel, she told me during one of our joint therapy sessions. I'm angry that they lied to me, but I'm also grateful that they took away some of the pain. That was the ethical complexity that made prosecution so difficult. Some victims had genuinely benefited from having traumatic memories removed. Some had lived happier lives without the knowledge of betrayals and losses. The question was whether anyone had the right to make those decisions for someone else. 3 months after the raid, I stood in my garage. The real garage, not the laboratory that had been built inside it. The equipment was gone, the walls had been repainted, and it looked like an ordinary storage space again. But I couldn't escape the feeling that the room was still watching me. Jenny helped me sort through boxes of Marcus's belongings that the FBI had returned after processing them for evidence. Look at this, she said, holding up a leather journal. It's Marcus's handwriting, but it's addressed to you. The journal contained entries dating back 5 years, documenting Marcus's growing involvement with Meridian Research. Day 1, they approached me at a conference, said they were developing treatments for depression and PTSD. The money they offered would solve our financial problems. Day 47, Rebecca had one of her headaches today. I gave her the pills they provided. She seemed calmer afterward, less anxious about work. Day 50s. They want to increase the frequency of treatments. I'm not comfortable with this, but they reminded me about our agreement. Day 312, Rebecca asked about the garage today. I had to lie to her again. I hate what I've become. Day 57 D8. They say she's responding well to the memory stabilization therapy. She seems happier, but she's not really herself anymore. Day 823. I went out, but they showed me photos of what happened to other partners who tried to leave. I have to protect Rebecca, even if it means continuing to hurt her. Day 194. They told me I'm getting sick. Heart problems. They can treat it, but only if I continue cooperating. I don't think I have a choice anymore. Day 1/20/47. Final entry. If Rebecca finds this, I want her to know that I loved her. The real her, not the version they created. I tried to save both of us, but I failed. I hope someday she can forgive me. I closed the journal. tears blurring my vision. Marcus had been a victim too, trapped in a system that exploited his love for me to ensure his compliance. "Rebecca," Jenny said gently, "what are you going to do now?" I looked around the garage, thinking about the life I'd built with Marcus and the life I was going to have to build without him. "I'm going to testify, at every trial, in every jurisdiction where they prosecute these cases. I'm going to make sure that what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else. And after that, I'm going to try to figure out who I really am. Not the version Marcus loved, not the version Meridian Research created, but the person I choose to be." 6 months later, I testified in federal court against Dr. Santos and her associates. The trial lasted 8 weeks and covered crimes spanning 15 years. The jury heard testimony from victims, family members, former employees, and law enforcement officials. Dr. Santos was convicted on 47 counts of elder abuse, medical fraud, conspiracy, and second-degree murder. She received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. 16 other defendants received sentences ranging from 10 to 30 years. The civil lawsuits were more complicated. How do you calculate damages for stolen memories? How do you compensate someone for having their personality artificially altered? Some victims chose not to participate, preferring to live with their modified memories rather than relive their traumas. Catherine decided to have her memories fully restored. She wanted to grieve her miscarriages properly, to remember her marriage as it really was, to reclaim ownership of her own mind even if it meant accepting pain. I chose a middle path. I recovered enough memories to understand what had been done to me, but I didn't pursue complete restoration. Some of the false memories Marcus and I had shared were beautiful, even if they weren't real. I decided to keep those and build new, authentic memories around them. Rachel and I had a long, difficult conversation about her role in everything. She had genuinely believed she was helping me get treatment for a mental illness. The payments she received from Marcus had been explained as loans to help her through financial difficulties. She had been manipulated, but she had also chosen to believe the manipulation rather than trust her own sister. We're slowly rebuilding our relationship, but it's different now. Trust, once broken by memory modification and systematic deception, doesn't heal easily. A year after the trial, I moved away from Charleston. The house held too many false memories, too many questions about what had been real and what had been artificially implanted. I bought a small cottage in the mountains of North Carolina, where I could see the horizon clearly and no one could watch me through telephoto lenses. I kept the garage key, though, not the digital lock that Meridian Research had installed, but the original key that Marcus had kept on his keychain. It doesn't open anything anymore, but it reminds me that secrets always have a cost, and that the people we trust most are sometimes the ones who can hurt us the deepest. On quiet evenings, I sit on my porch and try to separate my real memories from the false ones. It's not always possible, but I've learned that the authenticity of a memory matters less than what you choose to do with it. The woman who loved Marcus, who trusted him completely, who believed in their perfect marriage, she was real, even if some of her experiences weren't. The woman who survived his betrayal, who uncovered a massive conspiracy, who fought to reclaim her own mind, she's real too. I'm both of those women, and I'm neither of them. I'm the person I'm choosing to become, one authentic memory at a time. And every day, I remember that I'm free. The garage is empty now, but I finally know what was really inside it all along. The truth about the price of love, the cost of trust, and the strength required to rebuild a life from stolen pieces. Some doors are meant to stay locked. Others need to be opened, no matter how much it hurts to see what's inside. I'm glad I finally found the courage to turn the key. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.